The Sullivan children. The morning everything changed. It was 10 a.m. on a quiet Friday morning in May when Malia Brooks Murray's trembling voice broke through the silence of rural Nova Scotia. "My children are missing," she told a 911 operator. 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan had vanished from their home on Gearlock Road, deep in the woods of Lansdowne Station. But this wasn't just any missing children case. From the very first hour, something felt wrong. The timeline didn't add up. The stories kept changing. And the person doing most of the talking wasn't even their mother. If you're drawn to cases where the truth hides behind closed doors, where control masquerades as protection, and where the most dangerous person might be the one claiming to help, hit that subscribe button now. This story will challenge everything you think you know about family, trust, and the length someone will go to protect their secrets. The Sullivan children lived in one of the most isolated places you could imagine. Their home sat at the end of an unpaved road, surrounded by dense forest, far from neighbors, far from witnesses. It was the kind of place where no one could hear you scream, and no one would know if you suddenly disappeared. On that Friday morning, Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, claimed he heard Lily come into his room several times while Jack played downstairs. Then, he said, the house went quiet. When he investigated, the back patio door was slightly open. The children were gone. But here's where the story gets murky. The exact time kept changing. First it was 10 a.m., then maybe earlier. Daniel admitted the timeline was likely inaccurate. For a man reporting missing children, he seemed remarkably uncertain about when he last saw them alive. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived to find no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no blood. Just a door that may or may not have been open and a single small footprint about 10 feet behind the house, leading nowhere. What happened next sparked outrage across Canada. Despite having 2 missing Indigenous children, no Amber Alert was issued. The RCMP cited lack of evidence of abduction, but to the Sipekne'katik First Nation and other communities, it felt like something else entirely. Racial bias. Apathy. A system that moved slower when the victims looked like Lily and Jack. The search was massive, over 160 people, police 9 units, helicopters, drones. An estimated 10,000 hours of search time in just 3 weeks. But here's what's haunting. Despite all that effort, despite all those eyes looking, not a single credible sighting ever came forward. Not one piece of clothing, not one trace, nothing. It was as if 2 children had simply evaporated into thin air. But the most disturbing detail? The last time anyone outside the family had confirmed seeing Lily and Jack alive was the afternoon of May 1st, a full day before they were reported missing. They hadn't been to school for 3 days, allegedly because Lily had a cough. Everything after May 1st came from just 2 sources, their mother Malia and her boyfriend Daniel. And from the very beginning, Daniel did almost all the talking, behind closed doors. To understand what happened to Lily and Jack, you need to understand the house they disappeared from, and the man who controlled everything inside it. Daniel Martel wasn't just Malia's boyfriend. He was the architect of their isolation. The home on Gearlock Road wasn't just remote by accident. It was strategically hidden. No neighbors to witness daily life. No security cameras. No regular visitors. Even their internet was spotty, cutting them off from the outside world. If what you're hearing sounds familiar, the isolation, the control, the gradual cutting off from family, make sure you're subscribed, because this pattern runs deeper than most people realize. Malia Brooks Murray had once been a vibrant young mother raising Lily and Jack on her own within her Indigenous community. But after meeting Daniel around 2022, everything changed. She moved into his remote house and slowly, methodically, began disappearing from her own life. Her family hadn't seen her or the children in over a year. Every attempt to visit was met with excuses. Family dinners stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. "She just disappeared from us," one relative said. That's not grief talking. That's recognition of a pattern they'd watched unfold in real time. But it was the children who bore the most visible signs of what life in that house had become. Photos of Lily and Jack, taken in the months before their disappearance, tell a story that's hard to look at. Lily's arms were shockingly thin, the same width from shoulder to wrist, a potential sign of severe malnutrition. Her fingernails were caked with dirt in December, during a cold Nova Scotia winter. These weren't children who occasionally got messy playing outside. This suggested deeper neglect. Jack appeared in school photos with what looked like bruises on his jaw, cracked lips, and oversized, dirty clothing. For a child to be sent to school in that condition suggests either no one was paying attention or no one cared enough to intervene. Multiple photos showed both children with recurring minor injuries, dry, patchy skin, untreated sores, the hollow look of chronic stress. Most disturbing was something abuse experts call emotional incongruence. The children would smile when told to, but their eyes remained empty, tired, afraid. When search teams eventually entered the house after the disappearance, they found something equally telling. No toys scattered around, no backpacks, no personalized belongings that would indicate two young children lived there. No favorite blankets, no books, no signs of the beautiful chaos that comes with kids. It was as if the space had been scrubbed clean, not just of evidence, but of childhood itself. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the comparison between the children. Baby Meadow, Daniel's biological daughter with Malia, appeared healthy, well-fed, and clean in every photo. Her half-siblings looked malnourished, tired, and overlooked. That kind of disparity doesn't happen by accident. In child welfare cases, it's often a sign of intentional neglect based on family status. There were whispers in the community about Daniel's past, drug use, control issues, a pattern of isolating his partners. One person who claimed to know the family wrote online, they would withhold meals if Jack didn't behave. If true, it would explain Jack's underweight appearance and represent textbook psychological abuse, using food as a weapon of control. The isolation was complete. No regular medical care, no social interaction, no school attendance records that anyone could verify. The children existed in a void, visible only to the two adults who controlled their world. And when they vanished, only one of those adults was willing to talk about it. Subscribe now and hit the like button while here. The man in control. Daniel Martel didn't just speak for himself after Lily and Jack disappeared. He spoke for everyone. And in doing so, he revealed exactly who held the power in that house. Before we dive deeper into Daniel's web of control, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear represents a textbook case of coercive control. If this story resonates with you, if you recognize these patterns, please subscribe, not just for more content, but because these stories matter. They reveal how abuse hides in plain sight. From the moment the children were reported missing, Daniel positioned himself as the sole spokesperson, not just for the search efforts, but for Malia herself. When reporters asked how the children's mother was doing, Daniel answered, "She's resting. She agrees with me." When someone questioned his version of events, he responded, "She doesn't want to talk. She's been through enough." But here's what's chilling. Throughout the entire media coverage, not once did Malia Brooks Murray speak for herself. Not a single interview, not one social media post, not even a brief statement. Every piece of communication passed through Daniel, as if her voice no longer belonged to her. Daniel's language revealed his mindset. He constantly used we instead of I or she. We're doing everything we can. We just want them back. This created an illusion of unity while masking the fact that only one person was actually speaking. Psychologists call this coercive unification, using language to absorb someone else's identity into your own narrative. When pressure mounted and public suspicion grew, Daniel's response was telling. Instead of focusing on finding the children, he redirected attention to his own suffering. "Everyone wants to blame me. You don't know what we've been through." This wasn't grief, it was deflection, turning criticism into personal persecution. Then came the revelation that changed everything. A woman emerged online claiming to be Daniel's ex-girlfriend and the mother of one of his children. What she shared was devastating. She described a relationship marked by escalating control, Daniel dictating what she could eat, where, and who she could talk to. Friends and family were systematically cut off. Financial control was absolute. But it got worse. She alleged physical abuse, including being pushed while pregnant. She spoke of threats, of emotional manipulation, of Daniel using her postpartum depression as a weapon against her. When she began breaking down emotionally, he flipped the script and painted her as the unstable one. Most importantly, she revealed that Daniel had eventually lost all custody rights to their daughter. A court had deemed him unfit. This wasn't just an angry ex speaking out. This was a pattern of behavior that had already been legally recognized as dangerous. Her warning was clear. I'm speaking up now because I'm terrified he might hurt another child. The parallels to Malia's situation were impossible to ignore. Both women faced systematic isolation. Both saw their connections to family erode. Both lived in homes where Daniel was the only voice being heard. As the investigation intensified, the RCMP confirmed they had used polygraph tests on some of the 54 people they interviewed. Daniel publicly acknowledged taking one, positioning it as proof of his cooperation. But polygraph experts note these tests aren't used casually. They're reserved for people under serious suspicion. Soon after, another crucial detail emerged. Daniel was no longer allowed to see baby Meadow without supervision. Though no court documents were made public, multiple sources confirmed he'd been issued a no-contact order regarding his own biological daughter. For a biological parent to be banned from unsupervised contact with their child, especially in a crisis situation, requires substantial concern. It suggests that law enforcement, courts, or child protection services believed Daniel posed a legitimate risk to Meadow's safety. Daniel's response to this restriction was silence. The man who had once answered every comment, defended every criticism, suddenly stopped talking entirely. His voice, which had dominated the narrative for weeks, simply disappeared. But his silence spoke volumes about what happens when control finally slips away. Subscribe now and hit the like button while here. When the story breaks, the house of cards that Daniel Martel had built around his narrative began collapsing the moment Malia Brooks Murray walked away. If you've been following this case with us, you know we're approaching the moment when everything changes. The control mechanisms that held this story together are about to shatter completely. Make sure you're subscribed because what happens next reveals the true nature of what was happening in that house. It started quietly. Community members began noticing that Malia was no longer living on Gearlock Road. She had left Daniel and taken baby Meadow with her. There was no dramatic social media announcement, no public confrontation, just absence. And with Malia's physical departure came the end of Daniel's ability to speak for her. For over a year, Daniel had been the only voice. He controlled every update, every response, every piece of communication with the outside world. He had convinced everyone, including possibly Malia herself, that this was protection, that he was simply handling things so she could grieve. But when she left, the illusion collapsed entirely. Daniel's transformation was stark. The man who had once positioned himself as the devoted stepfather and protective partner began portraying himself as the real victim. "People keep coming for me like they know what happened," he posted. "You weren't there. You don't know what we've been through." Notice the language shift. The story was no longer about missing children. It was about how unfairly he was being treated. This wasn't grief. It was self-victimization. A calculated attempt to redirect sympathy away from Lily and Jack and toward himself. But the public wasn't buying it. Instead of earning sympathy, Daniel's words triggered more suspicion. People began questioning why he always seemed more concerned with defending himself than finding the children. Where was the raw emotion? Where was the desperate plea for help? Where was the love? The investigation had also escalated far beyond a simple missing persons case. The RCMP confirmed they were treating it as suspicious. They executed judicial warrants to seize phones and digital devices, steps typically reserved for criminal investigations, not welfare checks. Daniel's access to Meadow became another crucial piece of the puzzle. Sources confirmed he could only see his biological daughter under supervised conditions, and even those visits were reportedly rare. This restriction wasn't temporary. It suggested ongoing concerns about his fitness as a parent. Meanwhile, the RCMP had reportedly advised Malia not to speak publicly, possibly as part of protective measures. If Daniel was deemed a continuing threat, her silence might not have been choice but necessity. As Daniel's public presence faded, community theories began crystallizing around one central idea. The domestic incident cover-up. The premise was simple but devastating. Lily and Jack hadn't wandered off into the woods. Something had happened inside that house, something serious enough to require covering up, and what followed wasn't a search for missing children but a calculated effort to stage a different story. This theory gained traction for several reasons. The timeline inconsistencies, the complete lack of physical evidence despite massive searches, Daniel's controlling behavior, and his strategic management of the narrative all pointed in the same direction. If this theory was correct, then the morning of May 2nd wasn't when the children disappeared. It was when Daniel called 911 to report a story he had already crafted. The real tragedy had happened earlier, and everything that followed was performance. The motivation for such a cover-up could be multifaceted: fear of prosecution, fear of losing custody of Meadow, fear of public disgrace. If authorities had already been watching the home, if reports or prior incidents existed, the stakes would have been impossibly high. But theories, no matter how compelling, still require proof. And as the investigation continued behind closed doors, one question remained unanswered. What exactly happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan? The truth we're left with. More than a year has passed since Lily and Jack Sullivan disappeared from their home on Gearlock Road. No arrests have been made. No bodies have been found. No definitive answers have emerged. But sometimes, the absence of answers tells its own story. As we reach the end of this investigation together, I want to thank you for staying with Lily and Jack's story. If this case has moved you, if it's made you think differently about the warning signs of control and abuse, please hit that subscribe button and share this video. These children deserve to have their story heard, and your engagement helps ensure cases like this don't disappear into silence. The domestic incident theory remains the most compelling explanation for what happened. It suggests that something occurred inside that house, whether a violent outburst, a drug-related accident, or a moment of negligence that led to tragedy, and that what followed was not grief, but calculated damage control. Several factors support this theory. The complete absence of physical evidence despite extensive searches is extremely unusual for children who simply wander off outdoors. The timeline inconsistencies and Daniel's carefully controlled narrative suggest preparation rather than panic. His immediate framing of the disappearance as the children wandering off before any investigation had begun points to a predetermined explanation. Daniel's pattern of behavior, the isolation, the control, the systematic silencing of others, created the perfect environment for something terrible to happen without witnesses. His ex-girlfriend's warnings about his capacity for violence, combined with the visible signs of neglect in photos of Lily and Jack, paint a picture of escalating danger. Most tellingly, the investigation's evolution from missing persons to criminal probe, complete with polygraph tests and device seizures, suggests law enforcement believes something more sinister occurred. But significant questions remain unanswered. If this was indeed a cover-up, what exactly was being hidden? Was it an accident or something more deliberate? Did Daniel act alone, or was Malia coerced into silence? And most heartbreakingly, where are Lily and Jack now? The complete lack of physical evidence makes this case both compelling and deeply frustrating. It's difficult to prove what's been perfectly hidden. Building a criminal case without remains is notoriously challenging, which may explain why no charges have been filed despite clear suspicion. What we're left with is a story about control, how it operates, how it escalates, and how it can make people disappear long before they're physically gone. Malia had been disappearing for over a year before the children vanished. Her voice, her agency, her connections to family and community had all been systematically erased. The case also reveals how systems can fail vulnerable people. Despite visible warning signs, despite a pattern of concerning behavior, despite previous custody issues, Daniel remained in a position of power over these children until it was too late. Perhaps most importantly, this case shows us how abuse hides behind closed doors, especially in isolated environments where there are no witnesses, no oversight, no casual observers to notice when something goes wrong. Lily and Jack Sullivan were 6 and 4 years old when they disappeared. They should be 8 and 6 now, going to school, playing with friends, growing up safe and loved. Instead, they exist only in our memories and in photos that showed them looking tired, thin, and afraid. Their story isn't just about what happened on one morning in May. It's about every morning before that. Every day they lived in an environment where their needs came last, their voices weren't heard, and their safety wasn't guaranteed. As we close this investigation, we're left not with answers, but with lessons. When someone suddenly goes silent, when children look scared in photos, when family members are systematically cut off from each other, these aren't just red flags. They're emergency signals that require immediate attention. The truth about what happened to Lily and Jack may never fully emerge, but their story can still serve a purpose. It can teach us to listen more carefully, to intervene more quickly, and to believe survivors when they find the courage to speak. Thank you for following Lily and Jack's story to the end. If this case moved you, hit like and subscribe. We have more stories that deserve to be heard. Share your thoughts, your feelings, and your final theory in the comments below. These children may be gone, but their story can still make a difference in the lives of others who need protection, who need voices, who need someone to care enough to ask the hard questions. In the end, that may be the most important truth of all.